Fabulous. Well, welcome everybody. I think we're good. My name is Joanne James. I think you know that by now. Welcome. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to share my passion about osteoporosis and minimizing or preventing fractures in our lives. I graduated from the University of Western in, well, we won't talk about that part. And when I came out of university, I was in fitness, health, and wellness, and my goal was just for people to feel good about themselves, be able to do the things they wanted to do in life, and do it without pain, and do it with a lot of gusto and vitality. And I think I've been very fortunate in my lifetime to be able to do that. Now I have a new passion, and I've had it actually for 15 years. I've again been fortunate to work with Osteoporosis Canada over the last 15 years, just spreading the word in the news about osteoporosis, how to prevent it, how to manage it, and how to live with it. And now I've taken it from myself to the next level, which is how do we prevent osteoporosis? And I know that a lot of people are really interested in exercising to strengthen their bones, maintain good muscle strength so that they can do the things they want to do. But from my experience and what I'm seeing, people have been getting injured. So my message today, and I hope everybody gets a lot out of it, is how to prevent exercise or how to prevent fractures while exercising, how to minimize the risks of fracture. But before we start, what I'd like to do is thank you all very much for coming, because clearly you're interested in minimizing your fracture risk, or at least sharing with a loved one how to do that. So thank you so much for coming. It makes me feel like I'm doing something really good. Secondly, I'd like to thank Osteoporosis Canada, because over the years, I've had the opportunity to work with this amazing organization. The organizers of this event were also Jen and Liz. They've been amazing to work with, so thank you very much. I've really enjoyed my time as a volunteer working with Osteoporosis Canada. And then, of course, I'd like to thank Vital Steps and MedFit and their staff, because they're, again, a great group to work with. I love working with them. So all my thank yous aside, I'm a technologically challenged person. So if I get this to move on, please applause. And then every time it moves on, you can applause, okay? Because this is a challenge. Do I point to that, or do I just point? Okay. So we're going to do a little bit of a talk about bone basics. There may be someone here who's not quite clear what osteoporosis is, because my experience is sometimes people come to me and they say, my knees really hurt, my joints hurt, and then they go, okay, what's my problem? And I go, well, I don't think it's osteoporosis at this time. That's more like osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis or arthritis, which is more of joint inflammation. Osteoporosis is basically a skeletal disorder. It's characterized by compromised bone strength, predisposing a person to increased risk of fracture. In short, the bones are now brittle, they're thin, and they cannot maintain normal forces on it, and so unfortunately at some point they may fracture. So it's basically thin bones. The statistics were just mentioned earlier. 1 in 3 of the women and 1 in 5 men will suffer an osteoporotic fracture in their lifetime. That's a lot of bones. That's a lot of bone fracture. And almost 2 million Canadians live with osteoporosis today. It's only going to become more. And so, hence, it's really important that we learn how to, 1, prevent it, or to at least minimize our risk. And how do you do that? By learning what you can do to do that. Okay? Knowledge to me is power. So I'm hoping to share with you enough knowledge that you have that power to prevent the fractures. So just basically, some people have said to me, well, I'm not quite sure how I got this. I met a woman actually just a few days ago, fabulous woman, really perky, go-getter, go, and she's, I think, in her mid-70s, and she said 4 years ago, my bones were fine. I have no idea why I fractured. I don't know why I had all this pain. I'm confused. Nobody's explained to me what the problem is, and I'm like, well, there's got to be an explanation. There always is. As it turns out, 3 or 4 years earlier, she had gotten breast cancer. As a result, she was taking medication for breast cancer. Unfortunately, medications sometimes do impact on the bone. They rob the bone of the calcium, and they make them brittle, they make them fracture. So trying to explain to her that, she finally got it, and all of a sudden the pressure of, well, is there something wrong with me why I got it? And I said, no, that was more of a secondary condition. So secondary conditions mean you probably got some illness that required that you take some medication that unfortunately robs the bone of its strength, of its tenseness. The primary one is more postmenopausal, meaning, well, we all, if women, we all get there at some point, where we lose estrogen and certain hormones that support the bone and keep the bone tense. Also, it's associated with age. After the age of 65, the risks of having a little bit of bone loss increase. That's normal. For men, it's a little bit older than that. So there's primary and secondary. In some ways, we can do something about it. In other ways, we can't help it. Sometimes it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another. If we don't take the medication, we may not live. If we do take the medication, there's a consequence. Sometimes that's just part of life. It's a decision we have to make. Contributing factors to your bone health, one is genetics. Second is hormones. Very hard to control those. So those are sort of factors that we have a hard time controlling. If we're a woman, well, hormones, you can't really control that. That's something that's going to happen. And if it's genetics, it's something that's passed on. If we're looking at nutrition and physical activity, we can actually control our bones, our bone density with that. Poor nutrition leads to, down the road, poor bones. Lack of physical activity can lead to poor bones as well. Something that a lot of people aren't aware of, but would be really important for you to know for your grandchildren, to some degree children, your great-grandchildren, is that when you are maximizing your bone density growth, that generally happens up until the age of 18 for girls and 20 or 22 or 23 for boys. So when you have children who are not eating correctly, they don't want to exercise, they're now busy on those little like I said, I'm technologically challenged. What do you call those things? Those games that they play with their fingers and texting all the time. They're not really doing their bones any great service. So one of the things to keep in mind is if you have children, great-grandchildren, or grandchildren, is to make sure, if you can get the parents to make sure that they eat correctly during those formative years. Because once you get past those formative years, you're not going to really get any more bones. It's very hard to do that. So they have to maximize it in that time frame. We lose bone at a rate of 1% a year after the age of 30. Once we get to menopause, and I'm speaking to the women, not the men, once we get to menopause, though, we have a loss of estrogen and other hormones that actually impact on the bone. So as a result, we lose 2 to 5% of bones a year for at least 5 years. So you can imagine if you grew up not liking milk, always on a diet, maybe had an eating disorder in your teen years, didn't exercise, and had a genetic predisposition to osteoporosis, where you might be by the time you get to menopause. You're actually in trouble because you were in trouble before you even got there. So one of my recommendations is, if you know that you have osteoporosis in your family, or your mother had it, or your grandmother had it, or your aunt had it, then you make sure that you have your grandchildren and your children get checked and make sure that they're eating correctly, because if it's passed on, they may be actually experiencing that. One of the things that's very unfortunate about osteoporosis is that it's known, and its nickname is the silent killer. It does not, you cannot know that you have osteoporosis by looking at somebody. Now, unless they're very much kyphotic, that might be an indication, but with osteoporosis, you don't know. And I know in the centuries gone by, well, actually, in the centuries gone by, most people didn't live past, what, 45, 50 in some cases? Now our generation, we're living to 85, 90 to 100. And as a result, we're now seeing the impact of aging on our bones over time. So we don't know by looking at a person if they have osteoporosis. The most, unless they've fractured a few times before the age of 50, that's a good indication. Or unless they experience or are starting to exhibit kyphosis of the spine, which is the rounding of the spine. just so you have an idea. Now, what I'd like to do is just talk just briefly about a fracture, what a fracture is. And this is the biggest downfall for osteoporosis. This is what causes all the problems. You fall or you don't fall, but either or, you fracture. And that creates many problems. A fracture basically is a break in the bone. When it comes to osteoporosis, the fracture that's most important is what we call the fragility fracture. That's the fracture that happens from doing something like standing and then falling on the ground and breaking a bone. That's a fragility fracture because, quite frankly, there wasn't enough force for that bone to actually fracture. So that's a fragility fracture. And unfortunately, the part of the body that experiences it the most is actually the vertebrae and your spine. That's where you're going to see a lot of the fragility fracture. There are three main areas that we fracture. One is the spine, the wrist, and what we call the hip area, the pelvic bone area. So those are the three that you see in red. That's generally where you're going to see fractures. Any fractures that you see, like the skull, the hand, the ankle, the feet, those aren't considered. That's not going to be an indication that you have osteoporosis, let's just put it that way. But one of those three may be an indication that you have osteoporosis. Now, what causes this fracture? Well, there's three ways that you can fracture. One is by an abnormal force, high intensity, forceful. Okay, let's call a car accident what it is. A high intensity, high velocity, forceful event that your body meets force and an object and it breaks. Now, anybody here, including myself, can experience that kind of force on the body. I don't want to call it a normal thing, but if it happens like you're in a car accident or you fall off the 30-story building, you hit the ground, that's all abnormal, okay? Now, the second way that we'll fracture is if we have what we call suboptimal bone. That is a low bone density. Thin bones, bones that can't withstand a certain amount of force. So it's because the bone is thin. The third way is if we do, and which is unfortunately something we don't ever really talk much about, is we can fracture because of doing movements that are constantly repetitive. So I'm going to give an example. You know how some people have carpal tunnel syndrome, or they get RSI in their hands and their wrists from doing something over and over and over again? Or you work on, say, an automotive line, and you're constantly reaching up and then putting down, reaching up and putting down. And you keep repeating that motion over and over and over, day in and day out, month in, month out, year in and year out, and eventually something breaks down, okay? Well, it's the same with the spine. If you're constantly flexing up and down like this, back and forth, reaching down to pick something up, reaching over to do something like this, that is repetitive motion on the spine. So you can actually fracture as a result of that. So another example would be is long-term repetitive slouching and poor posture. So if you're sitting in a chair and you're like this all the time, over time, you wear that vertebrae down at that point. And then one day you go to do something and you go, ouch, something hurts here. So this repetitive poor posture can actually be part of a precursor to fracturing. Now, a lot of women and a lot of men, if you notice as we get older, we start to look a little bit like this, right? Because of this constant working on the computer, working over something over the years. And where you'll find a lot of fractures is in the vertebrae on the top here, because that's where this is what we're doing this all the time. So we need, again, poor posture. That repetitive poor posture all the time can actually create fracture down the road. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So when you're sitting down and you're working over your desk, you want to try to make sure that you maintain a good, strong posture, support around the back, abdominals, muscles in, shoulders gently back. We'll talk a little bit about that in exercise. Why should we care? Because over 80% of fractures in Canada after the age of 50 are caused by osteoporosis. We need to know the numbers to understand how serious this is actually is now. We have approximately 30,000 hip fractures that occur in Canada each year. Here's a very sad statistic. I had to make sure that it was there, you could read it. 28% of women and 37% of men with osteoporosis-related hip fractures will die of complications the following year. Okay, so we want to avoid those fractures, right? Now, another stat, and everything that I'm giving here are, if you ever want to know what the study is and where I got the numbers, I'll let you know. A fracture is a predictor of another hip and vertebral fracture a year after the first one, if nothing is done. And unfortunately, a lot of people go into the hospital, more mature, older adults, they've fractured, and sometimes what happens is they're not actually taken care of correctly. They're patched up and then they're sent home. And then there's no follow-up to find out, okay, does this person have poor bone density? Do we need to do a bone density check? Do we need to figure out what their fracture risk is for the next 10 years? There are things that you can do to predict what your fracture rate might be within the next 10 years. And that's something that your doctor can do for you. Now, the cost of fracture after hip fracture, well, we're talking just in total, in 1 year, $1.9 billion has been spent trying to manage people who have osteoporosis. Now, that's a result of hospitalization, institutionalization, subsequent fractures. All of that leads to a decreased quality of life when that person fractures. And I'm going to go back so that we can talk about what happens when that fracture occurs. So spinal fractures can result in a whole host of issues that you're reading right here. What I'd like you to do is just note basically, oh, little clicker here, let's see if I can do that. Hey, there you go. Is what a generally overall nice posture should look like. From there, it starts to decrease, and this is basically around 65 years of age. This is at 55 years of age. And then as the person ages and gets older, and if they have osteoporosis and they're not managing it, then what you find is a much more greater kyphosis of the spine right through here. And what happens is that the rib cage folds in. So I know a lot of people say to me, you know, how am I going to get rid of this belly? You know, it wasn't there before. Now, there's two stages where you hear that comment. The first stage is when women get into their 40s and all of a sudden that little tire starts to show up and they're not quite sure. That's a very common comment. The second is if they have osteoporosis, their spine is fracturing, their ribs are collapsing in, and the organs have nowhere to go. So where they're going to go is down and out. And that's what happens where you end up getting that protrusion. So posture type activities need to be done, and just wait, just try to prevent the fracture to start with. So those are a number of unfortunate situations that occur when the spine is compromised. So why we're here tonight is what I wanted to do is talk about exercise and how exercise actually can help to prevent, slow down, or stop the process of osteoporosis and how it impacts on the bone. I always view exercise as medicine because exercise is really medicine for the body. If you don't use it, you lose it. If you don't stress the muscles, they get weak. You can't do the things that you want to do. If you don't stress the muscles, it doesn't stress the bones, so the bones get weak, and then you're not allowed to do what you want to do. So exercise is medicine. It also preserves your bone mass and maximizes your bone geometry in adults. So if you don't exercise, you are cutting out a very important part of maintaining strong bones. So let's talk about safe activities, because that was really what this was about. What I just wanted to do is say, this is what osteoporosis is about, here are some facts. But what now I'd like to say now is when it comes to activities, we're going to focus on 3 things that need to be in your program. Whatever you're doing, and I'm going to state it again, exercise, no matter what the exercise, is generally okay for the body. What determines whether the exercise is okay for the body is what your status in your health is. So certain activities cannot be done by certain people, and other people can do activities that another person can't do, because all exercises are not created equal for each person. But I'm going to say It's better to do something than nothing. But I also understand why some people do nothing. If you've been given a diagnosis of osteoporosis, most people will go, oh my God, now what can I do? Where should I go? How should I be? They ask the doctor, how can I exercise? He says, just go to the gym and work out. I have a big problem with that because that's where sometimes injuries can occur, right? So what I find is most people want to do something, but they don't know what to do. They don't know how to do it. They don't know when to do it. And if you don't know that, it's kind of hard, one, to get motivated, but it's also hard to kind of want to do it if you don't know what you're doing. And most people are concerned about whether an exercise is safe or not and whether they should be doing that exercise. And that's what we're going to talk about from this point on. So one of the things that you must do and must have in your exercise program is weight-bearing activities. So if everybody can, I'd like everybody to stand, please. Now everybody, we're going to do push-ups. We're going to do 10 of them. I'm only joking. I woke you up. As you're standing, you are standing in a weight-bearing position. This is weight-bearing. Your pelvic bone and your legs are experiencing gravity and the weight of your body on it. That is weight-bearing. Some people are really confused what that means, and so that's why I wanted you to stand. If you're sitting, that is not weight-bearing. Okay, so standing, any activity that you can do standing, and both Michelle and Emma are going to demonstrate to you a proper standing position when you're going to exercise, which is you're standing with the legs apart. Everybody, hip width apart, knees are soft. Do not lock your knee back. You're not a ballerina. Only ballerinas lock their knee back and then they throw their hips forward. But you know what? They're trained, so there's nothing wrong with what they do. That's their training. Your knees will be soft and you're going to gently pull your abdominal muscle in. I didn't say take a deep breath. I didn't go, because that's not it. All you're going to do is actually contract the muscle and pull that lower abdominal muscle in, and that puts you in a neutral position in your spine, more or less. And when you stand to do standing exercises, that is the standing position that you want to be in. Weight bearing in a proper alignment with the spine. Okay? So everybody have a seat. Now, the second activity that must be in your exercise routine is weight resistance exercise type programs. So what that means is you have to be using some sort of equipment or your own body weight, usually the resistance band, or your own body weight in order to create a force on your muscles. Okay? So whether it's dumbbells, whether it's resistance bands, they're going to create a weight. Now, I'm wearing heels, so you know what? I'm not going to get down on the ground and do a push-up, but that would be like using my own body weight as a force or as a resistance. All of that is resistance. Now, the other thing you can use are weight machines as well. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So whatever activity you do must have some sort of resistance component to it. Why? Because when you do a resistant component type exercise, it stresses the muscle, then the muscle reacts to the bone. And the bone says, oh, by the way, you're talking to me. What do you want me to do? Get a bit harder? Sure, okay, let's do that. All right, so that's what resistance exercises do. Challenges the bone. Let's see. And as I said earlier, it needs to be in a weight-bearing position, and it strengthens the bone. I think that cat in the bottom, can you all see that? Okay, I guess I just flicked it right. Sorry. Anyhow, the third important activity that should be in your program is postural and balance training. The posture exercises are key. Why? Because if you don't work your back muscles, this is what your shoulders do. They roll forward. You need those back muscles strengthened so they do their job to pull your shoulder back. So that would be like your rear deltoids back of the shoulder. But you also have two muscles that run up and down your back, and they're called the erector spinae. And the exercises that you can do in order to strengthen them would be, say for instance, rear delt raises for the back of the shoulder and then you're going to do the bird dog in that position. And they will work the erector spinae, those two big cords that go up and down your back. Those muscles impact directly on your spinal column, so you have to keep them strong. If they get weak, this is what you end up doing. So you have to keep them strong to keep your posture up. Strength training using weights is very helpful for that. Let's see, what else here? So before you actually start into any kind of physical activity, you've got to get clearance from your doctor first. Consult with your physician, physical therapist, or an occupational therapist. Ask them if they're comfortable with exercises and osteoporosis, because all exercises are not created equal. You also have to keep in mind as to what degree of osteoporosis do you have. So everybody here is different. Everybody's an individual. You cannot compare yourself to the person beside you. You might have a minus 3.0, 3.5 reading for your bone density, and somebody else, and that be osteoporotic, but severely, and somebody else might be more osteopenic. Maybe they would have less than minus 2.0, 2.5. So you always have to get some level of consultation. Choose a leader or a facility that has people that have worked with people with osteoporosis. Like, that's number one, because an exercise can actually increase your fracture risk and or cause fracture. And I've met several people that have told me that they just did the wrong thing in the exercise class, and that was the end of that. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And then, of course, choose a program that you would like to do, but again, get clearance. For instance, I was just talking to a woman recently, and it's at the end of the slides here. And I guess her doctor gave her a clearance because she was so-called osteopenic, and the doctor gave her clearance and said, you're okay, you've been taking the medications, your bones look great, you can basically do whatever you want. So she went horseback riding. Well, the doctor said it was okay, and in this bouncing, because I guess she doesn't know quite how to exercise right, in that bouncing, by the time she got off the horse, she had fractured. So I don't care if you had osteopenia and they told you that your bones were cleared 100%, they're okay. Why? You can do a number of exercises and have a great time and not fracture if you know how to exercise correctly. But I would always, in my mind, assume, guess what? Let's be cautious here. Let's not do some of these crazy activities, because the pain that she was in for several months was unbelievable, she said. So that was just one of those stories. What a lot of people actually don't realize is that more fractures occur with people who are osteopenic than that are osteoporotic. A lot of people say, oh, I'm only osteopenic, it's not a big deal, I'm okay, it's just a little, right? And that's not true. More fractures occur when you're osteopenic, not when you're osteoporotic. I would ask the question, but I'll probably get 100 answers. One of the reasons why is because people just go on their merry way doing the things that they should not be doing because they feel that they're only osteopenic. So they bend incorrectly, they go horseback riding, they jump up and down, and they do activities that actually compromise their spine because they don't realize that that's not a good idea. If you have fragile bones, whether it's osteopenic or osteoporotic, it's still fragile bones. So treat it respectfully and treat it accordingly. All right, so here are some precautions, and this really is what I'd like people to really zero in on tonight. These are the precautions that that are recommended that you do not do, and some are cautioned. One is to avoid forward or side bending of the spine. Who wants to demonstrate? So I have Michelle. You're right in front of me. And what she's going to do is avoid forward flexion all the way up, and or side flexion, side to side with the spine. Okay? And the reason why is that they will cause what we call wedge fractures, meaning as you bend forward, all the force is on the anterior or front part of the vertebrae. So you have the vertebrae sitting like this on top of each other, and as you bend forward, you have force on that one little part. And if it's thin and it can't take the weight of your body on it, it'll fracture. Or you may do this over and over and over again, like say in a yoga class where you're doing, or Pilates, where you're doing the hundreds and you're doing that. Over time, you wear that down. It may fracture. Okay? So forward and lateral side bending is not very good, and that's whether you're standing, sitting, or lying down, not just standing. Okay? Second thing you want to avoid, Emma's going to demonstrate, is sort of twisting, bouncing, or jerky movements. And she's doing a twisting in a forward flex position, which means now you got double going on here. If you're twisting to your end position, you're torquing, and you, again, are compromising the spine. So twisting actions to the very end is not a great idea when you come to that. And as I just gave you the demonstration of the horseback rider, bouncing along and jerking away is not a great idea. It's not great for the spine. So those kinds of movements you definitely want to avoid. The most important thing is to practice good lifting techniques. So whether you're going down to the ground or not, you want to use your power muscles, your quads. Your legs are your power muscles. But guess what? Most people are weak, and most older adults are weak in their legs. And the way you'll know that you're weak is when you sit down, when you get to that last part, you go boom, and you sit in that chair, right? Or you need your hands to propel you out of that chair. You cannot rely on your quads, your quadriceps, or those power muscles, your thigh muscles. So one of the most important muscles that you've got to get strong is your thighs. And you can do that easily. We'll talk about that. So key things, anytime you see an exercise, your friends want to introduce you to an exercise or a new activity, the number one thing you want to do is ask yourself a question. Am I avoiding, am I doing forward or side bends? Is it jerky? Is it twisty? Is it forward flexion, unsupported with no support? Those are the key questions you want to ask yourself, okay? Now, we're going to be looking at some exercises. These are some of the exercises that I've been approached with, or I've been asked to, you know, is this a good exercise for me or is it not, okay? Now, Pilates is one of the more popular movements out there, and they're great. Pilates is a great activity to do, but a lot of the movements may compromise your spine. So, I'm not saying don't do Pilates, but you better do it right if you're going to do it, or don't do it at all. These are the two most common movements in Pilates. They're common. What is anybody can quickly say what they see here that's a problem? Sorry? Yeah, neck. And where's her spine? Her spine is flexed. Remember how I said this kind of movement? Well, her spine is flexed as she's holding her head up. So that's a compromise for her spine. So how can she correct that? Head's down. She can do the same movement, but her head is down. Her back is flat. Her back is supported. It's not going to create a problem for her. Now, what may be a problem is how strong is her lower half. But that's a whole different ballgame. To protect your spine, she would keep her head down. Does that make sense? Oui? Okay. Now, let's look at the saw. What's wrong with the saw? Yeah, twisting and bending, okay? So now it's a double whammy. I wouldn't even bother to do the exercise. I can do something else, yes. Back extensions? So right off the bat, because that is probably one of the most recommended movements, is back extension. Anything that you extend backwards is fine. And the reason why is because you can only go so far back because you got your vertebrae, the vertebral bones here, that prevent you from going all the way back. And it's also a back strengthening movement. So yes, extensions are fine, unless you have a low back problem where, and I do a little bit, where extensions actually aggravate it a little bit. That's a whole different ballgame. If you have osteoporosis and you don't have a back problem, that's generally okay. Okay? Okay, so let's look at another exercise. All right. Two very popular movements in yoga One is forward flexion, and then the other one is the pretzel. That's what it's called. Okay, so what's the problem with this exercise? Again, forward flexion, unsupported. So it's bad enough she's over, but now she's not even helping to support her weight. So that's why it becomes an issue. But if she was going to do a forward flexion from the hip, is how you would bend forward. And the reason, if you notice her back, it's in an extension position, right? So that's the safest position for the back. It's the strongest position that your back can be in. And then you just don't go all the way down. You just have to go down partially. You have to modify the movement. So let's look at this motion. This is Emma, and she's doing what we call the pretzel. And what's the problem with that particular exercise? Yeah. So, and this, she's twisting to the extreme end, and that's where it becomes a bigger problem. So it could be modified, and I'm going to have you straighten out your bottom leg. Okay? All right, and just put one leg over. And what you can do is just a nice gentle, you barely turn. You barely even turn. So it's very, very gentle. But again, I think it depends on the degree of osteoporosis that you have, whether your spine can actually take that. And my thing always is, when you want to do certain exercises and you're not sure about it, then speak to someone and say, okay, I'd like to take you through the exercises I'd like to do. Is it safe? I do this all the time for people. They want to join this, they want to join that. I say, okay, let's sit down and look at some of the key movements in that particular sport or activity, and here's how you modify it. Or better yet, don't do it at all. So if somebody comes to me and says, I'd really like to horseback ride, I'm going to go like, really? I'm not going to endorse it unless you're standing up on top of that horse and you never sit on that saddle, okay? I don't even care if you can make it rock. I don't care. If you're standing on the horse and you're not going to be jerked around, okay, if you want to take that chance. But other than that, I would say no. So certain movements, I'll say, like, it's not even worth the time and the energy. Let's find something else for you to do. Alrighty, so one of the questions we get a lot is, well, how about cycling? Do you like, can I do cycling? And I go, well, it kind of depends on what kind of cycling you're doing. However, there's only one issue that I have with cycling, why I don't necessarily recommend it as a way of building and strengthening your bones. What do you think that might be? It's not weight-bearing. Thank you. It is not a weight-bearing activity. You're sitting down. So that's one issue. That's why I won't recommend it as an activity for building bones. However, what other problems do you see from the racer coming forward or from here going back? Again, forward, flexion. Now in this case, it's sustained. They're over there for hours or minutes, depending on if you're a long-term racer. But to be in this position for a long period of time stresses the vertebral column. So it's not a great activity for the spine. What will work is the extreme end where you're in an upright position. And that's okay. It's not a big problem. But it's not the most recommended activity if you have osteoporosis, okay? So you can bike, but if you're biking for bones, it's not the best way. And this is an example where we're showing you the angle of the flexion, and this is what the spine looks like on an x-ray. I mean, it's just incredibly flexed, lots of stress, and it's non-weight bearing. Good. So another exercise, stationary exercise equipment, rowing and elliptical. We don't need a demo on that, but what do you see here, the rowing? Yeah. So they're forward flexing, and one of the problems is, as rowers, first of all, rowing is one of the activities that is done the least proper. Nobody rows correctly. Most people don't. They jump on a rower and then they just roll, and especially when they move inwards, they really forward flex and then they come back out. So it's not a highly recommended activity, and again, it's non-weight bearing. See? So what I like and I'm hoping that you guys are picking up on, is yes, you forward flex, but then it's not weight bearing. So that's a double whammy. So you can see double and triple whammies and single whammies, and then you can say, okay, something will eventually eliminate that exercise. Now, there's the elliptical. What do you think might be the problem with the elliptical? Sorry? Yeah, usually an elliptical, unless people are leaning, they're generally pretty good with it. But this is what you start to see. You start to see a lot of twisting from side to side like that, right? And again, torquing of the spine. But it depends on how that person is doing it. So they have to be careful of the elliptical or cross trainer. Yeah. Running and speed walking are great activities. However, running is not recommended for postmenopausal women because you can be constantly fracturing, doing micro fractures on a regular basis until eventually you fracture. So the bottom line is running, if it's premenopausal, is probably good as long as that person is not osteoporotic. After menopause, I don't recommend it. Speed walking is probably the most recommended type of activity to do to keep your bones strong. So going for a garden walk is not recommended. Well, you can go for the garden walk. So if you're window shopping and you're talking, you're walking along and you're talking to your buddies and you're having a great time, it's great for health. It makes you feel good. You're outside. It's wonderful. But it's not doing a lot for your bones because you're already strong enough. All right? That's like you guys all sitting down in a chair and doing exercises when you can actually get up and walk around and you don't necessarily need anything to support yourself. You're too young to be sitting in a chair and doing exercises. You should be standing and doing weight-bearing activities, right? So that's what I got to say about that. Okay, water aerobics and swimming. What's the problem? Yeah, it's non-weight bearing. Is there a little bit of strength work in there? Yes, you can use your arms and you can build up a little bit of resistance with the water, but ultimately, if your goal is to strengthen the bones, particularly in the lower part of your body, and you can do some leg work, flutter kicking and whatever, it's still not the best activity to do. Every activity I've mentioned, great for getting in shape and exercising and having fun and, you know, building strength. But if we're talking about your bones, certain activities are good, some activities are not. Tennis, any tennis players here? Any lovers of tennis? I know there's some real lovers of tennis. Did you want to, who's demoing? Yeah. Kind of looks like a golf swing to me, quite frankly. Okay, all righty here. Emma, do you want to demo it? Oh no, Emma's backhand. This was Emma's backhand. And I was like, what are you backhanding this way? I love my people here. Anyhow, the backhand, what am I doing? Yeah, so I'm twisting, unsupported, and then I'm coming through. That's not the problem. The problem is this, and sometimes that problem is extending over lateral flexion, right?
Am I correct? The knee is always in the right position?
No, it's not always, but that's sort of secondary. So watching how you play. Now, maybe if you got 3 or 4 people on the court, you could prevent yourself from doing that, right? Because you got all these people that can pick it up. But that's a movement we have to be careful of, okay? And who's the big golfers in here? Any golfers? Oh, wow. Okay, cool. All right. The golfing, I used to say, oh, you can't do this. Now, if you notice, in both of these postures, the far corner, forward flexion, unsupported. This picture now you can do your golf thing. And then you twist, right? Torquing, twisting on the spine, overloads the spine. So the key thing here, and I finally found somebody who actually has had 11 fractures and plays golf and hits the ball 300 yards down. Like, I don't know how this is done. But so there's a clinic happening. If the person's a great lover of golf, at least there's some chance that they can continue to play, because golfers are like joggers. Oh my gosh, it's like the end of the world if you take that golf game away from them, right? So I have to try to find a way to keep them happy. All right, so that, if you notice, there's a spinal rotation of the spine, of the hips, everything. There is a way and a technique to do it, but you have to be taught properly. Stationary equipments, I know some people like to be in the gym and they do the abdominal machine. You know that machine? Does everybody recognize that machine? Yeah, that's for the abs. Well, again, now you're loading it. Forward flexion, not so great. And then the other one is the abductor machine, working the outer thigh. What happens is people tend to have poor posture. They hunch into it, and then they open and try to open and close their legs. So that can be an issue as well. Okay? So I was giving you the story about the horseback riding. I also met another woman 2 days later, which was so ironic. And her and her husband and the family were on a speedboat. And they were just popping along the top of the water. And then I guess somebody else came along, a bigger boat. And you know what it created? Waves, right? So this is what the boat did as it's flying across the water. Boom, boom, boom. And she was out. That was the end of that for her. 6 months, extreme pain, several fractures in her spine. So it's not like she was even looking for it. But the bouncing, jerking movements and a bone that's fragile cannot take that abnormal force on it. So some people are asking, how much activity should I be doing? All I'm going to say is everybody should be exercising a minimum of 3 to 4 times a week if you can. And that could be just walking every other day, approximately 30 minutes. Try to walk at a nice pace. Try to get a little sweat on. Window shopping, walking the dog, talking to your buddies as you're walking. That's great for health and it feels good. It's not doing a lot for your bones. Unless you were somebody who had poor strength in their legs and now walking is good for them. Just doing that is good for them, then it's okay. But if you're agile, if you can move and you can do your own thing, it's not good enough. You have to do some power walking and you've got to add some movement and changes of direction, and you cannot do the same thing over and over and over and over again and expect a different result. So you can't do the same program. You can't lift weights 2 pounds for the rest of your life. That's not going to happen. You must increase your resistance when you're lifting weights. I forgot to mention that. You have to increase that. So make sure you get some balance training in your program. Even if you stand by a counter and lift your legs up and then let go of the counter and then hold on and try to hold your balance. Anything like that to work your balance is important. Posture training, make sure you got exercises that work the back muscle. Strength training, whether it's free weights, I recommend strongly free weights for people with osteoporosis. I say stay away from the machines because you can do more functionally with free weights than you can do with a machine. So I like free weights better. And most importantly, practice proper posture. In everything that you do, think up, think straight. When you're walking, try not to look down when you're walking. I know you're trying to avoid the cracks, and sometimes people don't clean up after their dogs, I get that. But the point is, when you're walking, you have to walk upwards. If you're over like this and you're walking, your center of gravity is off. If you should by chance buck your toe, you're going down, right? Because your center of gravity was already going forward anyhow. So learn to walk upwards. Strengthen the spine so that you're up and strong. Pardon me? Oh, Nordic pole walking is actually quite good. What we do like about it is it keeps your spine erect, unless the pole is too short, and then you're down here. But if it's up here, it keeps you nice and tall, and it's a good support for you to move forward, especially if balance is an issue. And that's a key thing. If balance is an issue, then be careful of power walking and things like that, because if you lose and you stumble, and make sure the treadmill has handles. If balance is an issue, don't just kind of run out there and do whatever you want. So remember, avoid end range motions where you're moving to extreme ends with the spine and twisting motions. Forward and lateral flexion. Again, be very careful, make it minimal or don't do it at all. Weighted forward flexion, meaning bending forward, holding weights when you're bending forward. Be careful, avoid those. Weighted rotation. but engage in moderate impact activities. That's why walking is good, because the bone picks up on the impact as you're walking, and that stimulates the bone. Balance training is key so that you are constantly honing your kinesthetic sense and your balance. Resistance training, which is weights, it's number one. If you want to maintain your bones, and in some cases improve your bone density, unless you're doing weights, it won't happen. So you really have to do those kinds of resistance type workouts. Yes?
What is the most you recommend in terms of going up to what number of weight?
It depends on the individual. I might be able to do 50 pounds, but I'm not going to give you 50.
So it's not age related?
It's not age related. You have to be reasonable with what you're trying to lift, and that's where you seek a professional to help you.
And do you recommend when you walk holding weights?
Holding is not a problem.
I see people do that.
Yeah, that's not an issue. We're going to have a Q&A section actually right now. Yes? Okay. Ask. You're quite bad at lifting. So she'd like to know how to lift something. So if you, yes. So you want to,
All the way from the floor?
yes, well. Okay, so down to one knee. Now there are many ways that you can get down to lift something, right? And that could be on a single leg where you go down on one knee. So you're keeping the spine straight. And then you pick up what you want, you bring it close to your body, and this is where you need the leg strength, right? Then you've got to power back up. So it's almost like if you had to pick up a child, how would you do that? Most people do this, and they pick up that child, right? Or they reach over a child's crib, a baby's crib. The grandmother is actually picking up the baby, so they reach into the crib like that. Number one for fractures, absolutely. Because now you're picking up a dead weight and trying to bring it in towards your body. That's a lot of force on the spine. So yes, going down to one knee, I've seen people kind of come down like that. I saw an older adult do that. I said, man, I hope I'm doing that when I get to your age, because I'm close, but not there yet. And that was amazing. She had so much strength and flexibility to be able to just squat right down and then squat right back up. It can be done. So does that help? Yes. Okay. And there's a lot of movements that we do at home that actually will create problems where we fracture as well, right? Getting down and picking something up correctly. So we have like a clinic that we run on activities of daily living at home. How do you modify the movements at home to maintain strong, a correct spine when you're moving to do things? Yes. Yeah, the mini trampoline, from what I gather and what I've read, it's okay because you've got softness in the knees. Usually you're bare feet when you're doing it, and it's a gentle bounce up and down. So it's pretty good. It's stimulating for the bone as well. That was first?
Yeah, well, the other thing is, bending, a lot of us with osteoporosis also have things like osteoarthritis.
Yes, knee issues.
So bending and stooping is not easy for picking things up.
Right.
What's an option?
Sometimes if you have a chair or something beside you that allows you to get closer to the ground, there are also tools that you can use to pick things up from the floor. So when we work with people, we're usually working with them on an individual basis, because what will work with you, even if you both have the same knee condition, you can't do the same, you have to do something different, right? So sometimes there are really neat practical tools that you can use as like little pinchers, sometimes to pick up what you need to pick up off the floor. But we would have to work with you a little bit more to see what would work. Okay, he got two hands up. And the piece. Yeah. Not as we speak. It's not there. Okay, well, we'll think about it. Yes, I'm sorry. He's asking if this presentation is online, and my response is no, because it's the first time I'm doing this one. So, but BoneFit, do they have anything on the in your program, Liz? Is there anything online that he can see, Yeah. If you go to the Osteoporosis Canada website, and there's a number of things that you can check on there, or you can give us a call. Jane. Yeah. And I'll get you next. Yes. What's your question?
If my spine is straight in the correct position, can I then lift heavy things safely?
You can, but it's still, yeah, but it has to be knees bent in that upright position. But you really have to really brace your core. So you can't like let your tummy hang out and your knees are locked back and your arms are out there, and just because your back is flat, everything works together. Your knees, when you bend your knees, your thighs then start to absorb some of the force that's coming. Abs are in, that starts to strengthen, it starts to protect your spine. So you hold it in, it girds you, and then you can bend and lift what you want to lift. But that doesn't give you a license to just go out there and start lifting couches and stuff. That's what that, if you got children, make them do it. That's what you got them for, right? I have a client, she is amazing. She couldn't make it tonight. When I first started working with her, it was only like 1 and 2 pounds. She was in pain when she sat up. She was in pain when she laid down. And we worked with her a couple of times. I says, I'm not quite sure I can help you because, boy, I can't handle the pain that you're in. She goes, I have to work through this. I've got to get stronger. That was about 10 years ago. She now does, which I don't always recommend to all my clients, she does planks on her hands, on her elbows. She does push-ups. Her favorite activity now, I don't understand it, she has a son, is shoveling snow. And she's got like a 30-foot driveway. I don't get it. And every winter she comes in bragging about how much snow she's done, and then she went next door and she did the neighbor's snow, and I'm like, come on. That's what you have a kid. She lives in King City. Oh, do you want her to come and do your place? I already tried.
What age are we talking?
I don't know, she's about 64.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And she just loves it. She's not giving up her shoveling. Because why? She got enough strength. It reduced her pain. She lost weight. Her back was stronger. And so now she's independent. She had to rely on her husband before. She got rid of him. She has the son. She still has him. And so she's as happy as she can because she decided to exercise, strengthen the muscles so that she could go do what she needed to do. Now, I know you had a question.
Yes, I always use a 2-pound dumbbell, and I never thought of increasing the weight. But a while ago, you were talking about that we should increase the
You have to increase the resistance.
strengthen the resistance.
Yes.
Right? So I should go up to like 3 pounds or something.
Okay, so she's asking the question. One of the things I mentioned earlier is you can't do the same thing and expect a different result. So, in order to strengthen the bones, because the bone adapts to the force that it's working with. Same with the muscles. If you start off with 1 pound and that's all you can do, and you keep working at it, and then you get to 2 pounds, great. The muscle will now adapt to 2 pounds over a period of time. Then you got to move to 3. Then it gets used to 3 pounds. Now you got to move to 4. And when it gets to 4, you got to move to 5. The issue is if you have any kind of joint issue. So if you had an elbow problem, you'll probably never see 8 because I don't think it's worth aggravating your elbow just to be able to lift 8 pounds. That's to me not practical. But you should be able to lift at least 5, 6, 7 pounds. I mean, and 8 pounds I think is a reasonable weight to lift. However, it's again based on individual situations, their health status, their fitness level, and you should see somebody first before you think you want to increase it. Now, increasing 3 to 4 I don't think is that big a deal. But if you're at 10 and you're going, oh my God, maybe I need to be lifting 12, well, we better talk about that because I want to know why do you need to lift that much more, right? You need to be more practical around that.
And is it okay to do both at the same time?
Yes, both is more challenging.
Right.
Miss?
What is the proper way of shoveling snow?
Pardon me?
What is the proper way of shoveling snow?
Oh, generally, your feet are apart, brace the core, and you want to try to keep your back up, and you move from there. You move with the legs. Now, the shovel that you use is going to make a difference too. There are some very ergonomically, nicely designed shovels that when you do this, it can pick up a lot of snow, but it doesn't stress the body. So you have to look at the shovel that you're using and then look at your form. But there is a way to do it with one-legged part, and you're moving the whole body. You're not, you know, shoveling in. So the lady behind you, she had a question?
Is there any benefit from using hand weights in a seated position?
The only time I could see using hand weights in a seated position is if you can't stand. If you can stand, you stand. You need the weight bearing on your pelvic bone and your legs. Sitting and doing hand weights, you have to have a really valid reason for me to be doing that, or if not, I think it's a lazy way of exercising, unless you need that position. Yes? And you don't look like the type that should be sitting.
What's the best way to get out of the bath?
Wow, that's a whole different story here. Yeah, we can talk. Because you got the issue of water, you know what? I would hope that the person is probably sitting on one of them benches. If they have osteoporosis, you should be sitting on one of them benches so that you can stand safely versus have to, you know, I've talked to people who couldn't get out of the tub for hours and had to float themselves around. I can't imagine until somebody finally came and helped them.
So what is the best way? I do have strong thighs.
Oh, then I would say turn over on your hands and knees. Put your hands either here on the rail, and then see if you could push yourself up. Yeah, and then step out and over. Yeah. One more? So just one more, and this lady had her hands up. If anybody else, well, we can talk after. Yes.
In your picture, the yoga picture, reaching your toes, it shows, and I understand that in the picture that the spine is being bent.
Right.
You're doing yoga and you flex from your hips and you keep your spine straight and your stomach in. Is it okay?
That's okay. As long as you can bend from your hips only. 90% of people can't do that. They think they can, but when they're doing it, they're not doing it.
If you can bend from your hips and keep your back straight.
Fine. That's fine. You're supporting because your back is not in a flex position. Yes. So I don't think I have anything else here. So my last little comment here, those who don't make time for exercise will have to make time for illness. So if there's anybody out here thinking, well, you know, I only need to exercise once a week and, you know, this okay. No, you have to put the time and the energy into strengthening those muscles, but with osteoporosis, you've got to do it safely. So if there's any questions, anybody ever wants to find out a little bit more about exercises, give us a call at the studio, or myself and Emma and Michelle are here. We can certainly answer any other questions. And I really do appreciate you coming and would appreciate your feedback on what you heard and if there's anything more you would have liked to know more about. Okay, thank you so much.